Today's episode is sponsored by newspapers.com, the largest online newspaper archive. Newspapers.com makes it easy to find your family's story with more than 500 million digitized newspaper pages from the 1690s to today. Search for obituaries, marriage and birth announcements, photos, and more in papers from across the U.S., the UK, Canada, and beyond, stretching back 3 centuries. For listeners of this podcast, newspapers.com is offering 20% off a Publisher Extra subscription. Just use the code Genealogy Adventure at checkout. That code is Genealogy Adventure for 20% off Publisher Extra.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to Genealogy Adventures. I'm Brian Sheffy.
And I'm Donya Williams. How are you guys doing today? Happy Juneteenth to you.
Happy Juneteenth.
Most definitely. You know, when I think about Juneteenth, it's about those forced American heroes that was given to me by sons and daughters of the sons and daughters of the Middle Passage. That's what they called them, forced American heroes. And we had so many of them, and they did so much to get us to where we are today. And that's what brings us to the story that we're going to be doing today, which is about HBCUs and how they brought us through education. So this is going to be an awesome show.
Indeed, and as always, thank you so much for spending the next hour with us, however you're tuning in, however you're listening. And this week, Donnie is going to be doing the introductions.
So this week, you guys, I am so happy to introduce to you my cousin, Kyle Yeldell. Kyle Yeldell is a policy analyst for the Committee on Recreation, Libraries, and Youth Affairs for the Council of the District of Columbia. A native of Washington, D.C., Yeldell received his Bachelor of Arts degree from Morehouse College and his Master's of Professional Studies from Georgetown University. So welcome, Kyle. And then later on, we are going to have YaYa back on the show, y'all. And you all know who she is. She's just like needs no introduction. So just look out for YaYa as well. But right now, Kyle Yeldell, how are you, cousin?
I'm doing fine. How about you all?
We're good.
I'm so happy for you to be on the show.
Yes. I win this hat too. My mom bought it for me, so I was like,
"Yay, HBCU all day." I should have put on my Jackson State shirt.
True. So for the benefit of the audience, we like to kind of start from the very beginning. And well, I suppose let's just start with the definition. What, I guess in terms of a legal framework, what is a historically Black college and university? What separates that kind of educational institution from other colleges and universities?
Historically Black college and university is an institution that was created specifically to educate at the time, whether they be formerly enslaved African people or the children of enslaved Africans. So it was created specifically for that purpose.
Okay. And when did that conversation even start?
The first historically Black colleges were founded in the mid 1800s. So I believe the Cheney was 1837. I think Lincoln was second, I think 1854, and then Wilberforce 1856. So probably in 1850s, definitely 1850s to 1880s, you had a lot more institutions created. So I think that's when it became more of of a conversation, or just, people started wanting to create their own.
Okay, so we're kind of talking about a decade before the Civil War, before slavery ended. So I guess to combat any confusion with the audience, if we're still in the slavery period, what Black people were going to those institutions?
A lot of, let's be honest, a lot of mulatto children. So you had a lot of people that were the offspring of, I hate using the word slave, but yeah, white slave owner and enslaved Africans, or people that, I don't know, I guess wanted to advance themselves at some point. But I think most, like I said, most schools, well, let's be clear. So Cheney's in Pennsylvania. So obviously their history with slavery is a little different than the Deep South. So Cheney and Lincoln, both in Pennsylvania, Wilberforce in Ohio. So they were northernmost, and it wasn't really until after the Civil War that Southern schools then started to have their own HBCUs, because those are still to this day probably the three most northern HBCUs.
Mm-hmm. And I would imagine that free people of color were also sending their children to get educated.
I mean, it sounds like it was mostly free. It was a lot of
free colors, and then, like I said, free colored people, and then also, like I said, the aspect of which you'll find a lot in the history is, somebody being an offspring of, a white person in an enslaved Africa.
And I guess I'm really interested about those really early curriculum or curricula. In terms of, were they primarily agricultural? Was it a mixture of professional trade, professions, trade, and agriculture? Was it a mix of like those three things?
Yeah, mainly so. From what I've seen, it's mostly a lot of agricultural positions, and that's a deep conversation about, especially later on, even trying to maintain that, even though African Americans were going more into professional trades, keeping the trade, the agricultural space for them end up being an issue, because a lot of poor whites did not like the advancement of African Americans. So they would say, okay, well, you all can fund this as long as you're training them to do this type of job. And that ended up happening not so much in HBCUs, but like with Rosenwald funding for Black high schools. That definitely was the case. A lot of Southern schools that were created solely for Black people were such and such technical high schools, such and such, normal schools. You see that a lot with your oldest Black high schools were like normal training, as opposed to professional track of wanting to go and be a liberal arts major in college. That was a lot of it.
And normal schools did a lot of teachers. They were training teachers. So those were teacher colleges. Matter of fact, that's what UDC was formed from, two normal schools. So that's how UDC was formed.
Yep, exactly.
So I just want to quickly cycle back to something that Kyle said, because I think something just kind of got slid under the radar there. So you were talking about the poor demographic of Caucasian people. So they were a little bit upset. Was that part of this kind of great replacement theory that was kind of going on back in the 1850s? Is that like an iteration of what we're going through today?
Very much so.
Oh my God.
Very much so. I mean, that's always been a theory. I mean, now they have a name for it, similar like critical race theory has a name for it, when it's just history for us. Great replacement theory definitely started at the moment that Reconstruction, and as a lot of people may not know, but Reconstruction was was a time when African Americans had the most positions of in Congress and state legislatures. And so when you start seeing that, it's like, yeah, well, we used to be in power, so don't be giving them too many resources, because it's going to take away from us.
Right.
So I'm just going to make a really quick comment, and then we're going to introduce YaYa.
Yeah.
So the fact that there were, if you were white, and I get it, you're poor, it's not easy to afford university, but there are literally hundreds of universities that you could go to if you wanted to work hard, save your money, and go. But they were still going to be resentful about the fact that formerly enslaved people also wanted to have an education. Is that the kind of vibe that I'm picking up on that one?
Definitely. I mean, what they say, when you're used to privilege, um, trying to think of the word for it, but inconvenience seems like oppression, right? So when you're used to being number one in everything and you being the only people that have anything, and all of a sudden people get an inch, you think that like, oh, that they're going to eventually take over. That happens all the time. So I definitely agree with that.
Okay, even if those people are coming 20 miles behind you, and they've been kept 20 miles behind you for like over 100 years, but you're gonna catch your feelings about it. Okay.
Sure.
Yeah. Thank you so much for joining us today.
How are you? Happy Sunday.
Happy Sunday, and I believe Donnie is going to formally introduce you because we have audience members who don't know who you are.
I mean, it's impossible for them not to know who she is. Come on,
but we're picking up new viewers all the time.
This is my boo. This is my sister. This is YaYa Gordon. She does everything from Whitney Plantation. She gives tours on the plantations. You guys, she is everything African American, and she can tell you everything about anything dealing with African American history. YaYa has a PhD. She's a PhD candidate in Howard University at my school. I love. Yes, I love. And she's got a Master of Arts in Museum Studies at Southern University in New Orleans and a Bachelor of Arts in History at Southern University and A&M College in Baton Rouge. So please welcome Miss YaYa Gordon.
Hi, y'all.
To the show.
Hi, y'all. And just one quick tidbit. No, so I don't work on Whitney. I work in the river parishes, but some of the work I do is just to research some of those people. But I work on the other plantations.
Okay, so then yes. my apologies.
No, you're fine.
My apologies.
No problems.
One day she's gonna give us a tour. One day she's gonna give us a tour.
Yes.
So you haven't missed much. We've been concentrating on the really kind of early years of historically Black colleges and universities and kind of what led to their establishments. So Kyle has kindly been telling us, that it goes back further in time than even I thought. I didn't realize that they had started in the 1850s. Those really early ones. So that was a bit of fascinating history to learn about. And you came in literally as we were talking about. There was some pushback. There was some resentment.
Still is.
And I want to respond to that last thing that you guys were talking about. This was one of my major things. I felt once I started to do my research and it opened me up to all of those, all of that information about African Americans as a whole. I always said they came out running from slavery and they formed these things. They became doctors and lawyers and politicians, and they did all these things straight out of Reconstruction era. And this is one of the reasons why that I believe the Reconstruction era is probably the most important era that needs to be taught, and it's not. So I wanted to, just piggyback off of that with you guys because it's an amazing thing. Just like Kyle said, yeah, they felt like we were not, needed to hold you back for a little bit. And that's when all those other laws started kicking in and trying to make us stop doing things. So I definitely agree with what you guys were saying.
But I can kind of sense the shock maybe of the larger part of the Americas as it was back then. Because if you've been told for a generation that our people were brutes, animals, animalistic, dumb, stupid. I mean, we know that they weren't because there were highly skilled tradespeople, from Louisiana sugar plantations on up. But if that's what you're told, and then all of a sudden these dumb brutes are going to university, getting degrees, articulate, writing books, writing political pamphlets, running for office, passing laws, that brief period showed that everything that came before that was a lie.
Can I intervene just really quickly on
Mhm.
it? And I'm glad you said that about the individuals who are, writing books and writing pamphlets, and they're very articulate, because many of them, were and had to suppress a lot of that. However, and I think I was speaking to Donya earlier about the Morale Acts and how it made for land grant institutions, and to try to kind of shift it over from more arts and literature. And so it's still, in a sense, wanting to keep us out of areas like that, of literature, of humanities, and still keeping us in with lands, with working with our hands in land and mechanics. And so it's creating a momentary fix for a problem that they didn't want to really address, but they knew they had to address it, because they knew we weren't brutes. They knew this. They absolutely knew this, but they wanted to make sure that we still did not move in the same circles that they were going to be moving into if they were going to allow us to have this education.
Got it. Which brings me to an interesting question, and this is for both YaYa and Kyle. In terms of creating a curriculum, how free were the schools to actually do that? Or was that kind of partially prescribed to them?
I'll say I think it's a mixture of things. So most of them, so interesting enough, a lot of my research around Black schools has been through Black high schools. And I think that, and obviously the correlation between the two, because obviously Black high schools fed into historically Black colleges, and some of the schools that opened up and were more open to African Americans attending them. But I think that there was freedom to create their curriculum, but it had to be based on, one, what they knew in developing curriculum, and also kind of the positions that they could go out and do. So if you look at like a school like Spelman College, now it's Spelman College, it was Spelman Seminary. Like, they had a lot of things geared towards the jobs that women at the time were able to have. So the Spelman that we know today is nothing like the curriculum it was back then. So, but that's also based on kind of the time. So it's, I imagine that they could have envisioned that they would have, computer science. Well, I mean, not computer science, but something a little bit more like an English or traditional English major, or a history major back then. But they were looking at what most women would be employed doing at the time. So I think it's freedom, but also reality.
And I agree with that. It is meeting people where they are and where they were at that particular time. And many of these women they had to go to normal school. They had to go to school to become teachers. And the curriculum that was provided it was not the same that, say, a white institution would have had. Many people would have had to learn as they go and learn as an apprentice or kind of hands on the job. And so they weren't equipped to teach everything as it was or should have been taught. So they were able to, but those who were educated in other institutions outside of, say, a typical Black school, or school for African Americans, they would have been able to bring some of that knowledge to these schools to try to be able to teach what was actually required instead of just what they knew.
Got it. And for the benefit of the audience, of the four of us, I am the only one who did not go to to a historically Black college or university. So
while you said that, I was just getting ready to type "rep your school." We already got two up here, and I was just getting ready to type "rep your school" today. So yeah, go ahead.
So I'm learning as much as the rest of the audience. But I've got two questions off the top of my head, kind of cycling back to something that both YaYa and Kyle said. So in terms of the HBCU structure, who or what kind of people were actually sitting on the board? Because it's the board that always kind of calls the shots and shapes that kind of university experience. Who was sitting on that board?
You mean now or then?
Then, when they first started.
Well, I can only speak for the ones I guess some of the ones, especially in Louisiana or in the South, but some of these individuals were politicians after slavery, and they were also coming from families who were free persons of color. And so they had a little bit more ability to establish some of these institutions because they may have been able to maneuver inside of certain circles that others otherwise would not have been able to do so. And that also would mean that they're sometimes some of them were creating establishments and institutions for their own kind. And so when we think of it being open and available to every single Black person or African American, that is not necessarily true to an extent. So because whoever is operating, yes, many of them will wanted education for everyone, but you have to really look at the makeup. And some of these presidents were in fact not even Black people or persons of color, or people us on the board are helping them establish. So it's not always us that were the ones that were creating these institutions. Some of these HBCUs very well had white presidents, had white founders. So it just varies depending upon the school and the persons.
Yes.
No,
I don't like. Go ahead, Kyle.
no, I was going to add white abolitionists and white ministers oftentimes served on the boards of some of the schools as well, and people that were in charge of like Baptist conferences or Protestant conferences that helped with either the establishment, and they had somebody on the board. But I know, like definitely for my school, Morehouse, we had, white presidents, and the founder of the school, Henry Morehouse, is a white man. So that's not uncommon for especially private HBCUs, for them to be founded by white men that were, advocates for Black education, but nevertheless were not persons of color.
Mm-hmm. And my second question was about Black women, about Black girls who wanted to go to university. Roughly, I mean, if you have the rough numbers to hand, I mean, roughly what percentage of students going to historically Black colleges were women?
I don't know the number, but depending on the school, it was pretty fair. Like, I think Lincoln was all male when it first was created. But if you look at, like, I'm doing a historical project around my fraternity, and I've looked at Clark University actually at the time, and Atlanta University, and they had a large population of women students. And I've looked at like A&T in the 20s, and this is obviously in the 20s, so I'm not sure about the 1880s, 1890s when it started, but I believe that it was a good amount. It wasn't just like 90% men. I think it was a good amount of women that were students at the schools, from my vantage point.
Right. And then a lot of these women, say on these colleges that were there, they became the wives of, say, some of these administrators. Yeah. And so you'll see a lot of them now then transitioning into being teachers, say home economics, or teaching a normal school. And their names are on the building as well. So they're some of the first graduates of some of these institutions. So the number is not extremely low at all. I can't give you a definitive figure, but it was definitely not extremely low, because women were taught different things inside of higher education as opposed to the men. So there was a small place for them just as well. They had to fight to get there, but they needed a place for them to be. And even if that meant that those young women were taught cooking just so they can cook for the young men that go to that institution that are learning mechanics. So women were definitely in that fight. Men were definitely more so amongst the HBCU campuses, but women also had a definite place, but just in a different type of career and work path.
Yeah, our girl that did the book, that did our book, House of Bondage, she was actually a teacher. She actually did that, and then turned around and married one of the founders, as far as for one of the schools in Louisiana, if I'm not, or at least one of the board members, because I do remember them saying that her husband was a preacher who was on a board on one of the historically Black colleges. And she did the exact thing that they were just talking about. She married on, but she was also a teacher, and yeah. So I definitely agree with that.
And then I've got a question for all three of you. It's kind of a two-parter. So the first part is talking about some of the challenges that these institutions faced in being created. And then the second one is talking about the cultures that got developed at the different schools.
Okay, as far as the challenges that were there, we have to kind of look into separate but equal. Is it really going to be separate but equal? Where, again, going back to the Moral Act, if you had putting monies into making sure that these particular states and these particular areas have schools that you can't be, you got to bypass race on admissions, but then making sure that, okay, you're not going to get any money unless there's an equal Black institution that is there in that particular state. So that the 1862 Moral Act, and then there's 1890. So that's where you get the 1890 society and schools of that are around that are built off of that. But that still did not make it equal. I can think back now about Southern University, a student, Dr. Viola Coleman, who wanted to be a doctor, and she was a test case for the NAACP back in the 30s and the 40s because she wanted to get into LSU Medical School. And the courts eventually allowed the schools to establish a medical school and a law school, separate but equal, but they only did the law school instead of the medical school. So the fight has been trying to get equality in since the 1850s. And it even went through beyond the 1930s and 1940s. So that fight has always continuously been there. And so it's been the same fight of making sure that we are properly acknowledged and have the same ability to have an actual education. And in order to desegregate, at first everyone was kind of like, okay, well, at least we have something. But now the question is eventually went into, well, we don't want to just have something. We want to be included. And so it's that issues, the challenges of giving us something, but also inclusiveness. That has been the constant fight. I'll let Kyle answer that part and go to the other one.
Yeah, shoot, you said a lot. I think that, and just to be clear, Brian, ask the question one more time because I want to make sure I get the nuance of it.
Okay, so I guess sticking with the first question first, what were some of the challenges that these institutions experienced in terms of being established and getting set up?
It's like she talked about the separate but equal aspect. Finding people that are willing to fund it. If you were, so like you said, from the public side, you had the land grant aspect, but then from the private school side, you had to find funders. You had to find, I said, times and nine, it was white abolitionists that had the money to fund these institutions. And then also dealing with people that, with these funders, the backlash that they often got for even supporting education was a huge thing, you know. So like I said, when you're dealing with a situation where people have been raised to believe you are inherently lower, lesser class, and then you finally get some opportunities, that's a societal shift psychologically for people to say, what you mean you get a school? We don't think y'all can read. It was illegal for you to read. So now you're getting a whole school, and especially when you're talking about poor Caucasians that may not even want to advance their careers that way. They're like, well, how come they get a college? And you know, and they possibly can get a college degree and move past me. You had a lot of that as a kind of groundswell of the people fulfilling about the advancement of African Americans at that time through education.
Seeing again, I'm sorry. I swore I wasn't going to do this, but I'm going to do it. Why? There's just, and I don't expect a comment to this. It's just an observation. It just frustrates me that there is a strand and a thread in this country where just because a group of people either can't have something or don't want something, no one else can have it. And that's just really frustrating.
That's America. I mean, America is built on privilege. Everything we think about, capitalism to the racial construct, is built on privilege. I've seen it play its part in so many different ways. especially as we're developing a more diverse society, whether it be LGBTQ issues or I remember somewhat it's based on this, but somewhat of like a escape of this exact line of conversation. But I remember when during the height of all the police shootings before George Floyd, there was one in New York, a kid named Akai Gurley got shot in a Brooklyn project by a white cop and an Asian cop in the stairwell. And the Asian cop got charged. And this at a time when a lot of police were still not getting charged for this. And I remember there were protests of Asian people saying, like, how come he get charged? Why are you all putting it on us? All these other white men have not been charged, and why you put it on us when we're the model minority? And I was like, even then, whatever privilege people have in this country, whatever perceived or real, they're trying to maintain that. And in that conversation, I was like, wow, like you're not mad that this man died. You're not mad. You're mad that of all the white cops, this one Asian cop got charged, and he shouldn't have because he represents the model minority. So all America is just passing off or developing privilege and trying to block other people from getting advantages. That's just a common theme in our country that stems from all of these other reasons.
And it's so funny that you said that, because when you guys were given your version, what you felt as far as the culture, was concerned and everything, but I'm pulling it up earlier and using my school as an example of trying to be equal when they were fighting for the Vietnam War, and there were protests going on both at Kent State and Jackson State University, and 9 people were killed at Kent State, 2 people were killed at Jackson State, but it was the Kent State that got all of the recognition of what was going on during that time period. Meanwhile, someone I went to school with had just lost his father. Right. And it was nothing. And these people, they literally shot up Jackson State's Alexander West Hall. Right. Sorry, East Hall, because that's where I stayed. And the bullets are still there today.
But everybody remembers everybody knows the photos from Kent State.
Kent State. It's everything is about Kent State. You don't hear about what happened at Jackson State and why all of a sudden they put an entire island in the middle of a street so that they could stop white people from riding through and shooting up that area. Yeah. But that's what they did. They literally plopped an island, and now you can't ride up J.R. Lynch at all through Jackson State. You have to walk through because It's a whole walk. It's a whole walkway now. Whereas when I started going there, it was like a island with a small ziggurat in the middle of it that we would sit on, and that was our plaza. And that's where it was. But that's why that plaza was there, because of what happened.
But that goes back into the complications and the issues that HBCUs have had to historically and currently still have to deal with. We've had to deal with the murders on the campuses. We've had to deal with getting subpar education sometimes. We've had to deal with not being able to have the same respect for our degrees then and now as other institutions as white, typically as PWIs, predominantly white institutions have had. There are cases where there are students who don't on HBCUs that didn't even have the equipment or the books that they actually would need, and it's almost sometimes worse than if they were in integrated atmospheres. At least they may be able to hear across the room or from the hallway, but they don't even have they're not being given what they need at the HBCUs. And so, but that also which makes us so great, because we've had so little and we birthed so much with it. And so that's what builds the culture part that Brian mentioned for the second part of that question, things we've had to do to create that culture of community and engagement. Being a descendant of, say, formerly enslaved people, we have had to build families. And that is what HBCUs and HBCU culture has done for so many people. We come from all facets of life in all parts of the country and the world. And it's like one big family reunion. Now, sometimes, family reunions get a little rough, but it's a big family reunion. Everybody is there for the common good. And it is so much more than the competitiveness in the haves and the have-nots. We know what we did not have, so we want now. And that is the culture that it has created. but also a culture of, a little bit of competitiveness. I heard Kyle mention his fraternity. I'm in a sorority as well. And so, but we all love each other. And that is what we continuously do. And just knowing that we come from a struggle, but we don't have to live that struggle. And by having that atmosphere of an HBCU, it shows us that we don't have to maneuver in the same circles as everyone else. We have our own, and we are satisfied, and we are great with that.
YaYa, are you peeking at my show notes? Because you just segued perfect. You just segued perfectly into what I wanted to talk about.
Because she's great and she know what we want. She's great and she know what we want.
I swear. So I have a feeling that everyone's going to really love the next part of the segment. Is, from my understanding of it, there's like an overarching culture for HBCUs. But what I seem to also get, and what I love, is that each one has its own distinct culture. Right. Can you guys talk about the different cultures that can be experienced?
I'll say I'm a graduate of the only all-male HBCU in the country. So there's a lot of very specific traditions that Morehouse has. From even during our freshman orientation, we're not allowed to wear Morehouse paraphernalia until it's over. Or from just the steps of how we learn certain things. By the time you're done with freshman orientation, you're kind of indoctrinated in Morehouse in ways that most institutions, period, just aren't, just because of you get to, it's a lot. I learned our school song by the third day I set a foot on campus. And then learning chants at football games, all that was part of like a very regimented orientation process. There's certain things on campus that have certain meanings. We have a bell on campus. And so imagine this. So I go through freshman orientation in August of 2001. And part of it was, one of the things was For Whom the Bell Tolls. And it's like this tour that you have to take of campus and all these buildings. And they're like, the bell tolls when a Morehouse man is in distress. 2 weeks later was 9/11. The bell rang. The whole campus shut down. It was like immediate. Like to this day, I've never heard the bell ring, but the bell rang that day, and it's not like a big clock tower bell. It's a bell someone can reach. When that bell rang, it was like, what is happening? And it was 9/11. My freshman year, so you instantly saw the culture kind of. You saw the solemnity of it. Like no one in my class would have ever touched that bell for something that wasn't as cataclysmic as September 11th, right? And so there's just little things that you learn. Part of my freshman orientation too, where they give you a list of like these questions you have to answer, like how many turtles are on top of the cafeteria. We had to walk around and come up with the answer. You had to talk to an upperclassman, get the answer, and if they got the answer right, they had to sign it. So in that process of like 40 questions, you got to meet 40 new upperclassmen. Mm-hmm. There's all types of stuff in Morehouse that's based on, a fraternity within a fraternity. So I say my school has a lot of very specific cultural mores and traditions that I know a lot of HBCUs do as well.
Mm-hmm. And YaYa?
Yeah, a couple of mine. So with Southern University, I'll go with Southern University and A&M College in Baton Rouge. I love Jackson State too, but I'm gonna go with SUBR. Okay, so we have a lot of traditions. I mean, starting off early on, we have the traditions of just for instance, for our band. If you're a freshman in the band, you don't walk on the grass. No crabs on the grass. That's just what they were not allowed to do. But even before that, in the early days of the foundings of the university, you have the men and women on one side, and they're not allowed to cross the grass to get together, because back then you had to have some kind of decorum about oneself and not go to certain places to venture out, because you don't want to get a bad name for yourself. Ladies were ladies, young men had to be young men. Nowadays we have Pretty Wednesday. Every Wednesday, everyone goes to the Smith Brown Memorial Union And they dress up, they play music out there. But it's so many different things that go on that are cultures that are sustaining, but that are still dying. Of course, we all have our Founders Day. Our president and his wife and his son, he was also a president, they're buried on our campus. You can visit their graves, right, when you go there on the bluff. And one of the things that when I was working at Southern University did a few years ago was try to talk to students and create initiatives to further that HBCU experience, because we don't want it to die. What is that HBCU experience? What do you want that culture to look like? Is it sitting on the lawn, on Mayberry Lawn in dashikis or something, or just listening or braiding hair, just something? What is that actual culture? What does HBCU life look like to you? And so that is something that we really hold near and dear. And so by us being on that bluff and just spending time there every single day, that's a whole culture, within itself, outside of the things like going to the student union. But every Southernite knows each other. We love, our bands. We know our fight song. We know it. We have our normal rivalry with Grambling State University. That's right here in Louisiana just as well. But it's a friendly rivalry, except for Bayou Classic time, and that's another tradition that we have. We don't like each other, and we don't.
That's HBCU.
But we come collectively together, and that's how we operate. So that's part of the culture too, that rivalry, because we know we can fight but love each other at the end of the day.
I was gonna say that Bayou Classic it's y'all's first and foremost, but it's definitely an HBCU. It's a piece of HBCU culture. Everybody knows the Bayou Classic.
Right.
They put on NBC.
You don't even go to HBCUs or
Bayou everybody knows. You got to know about the Bayou Classic. That's. I love it. I love it.
And Donnie is here to rep Mississippi.
The sip.
So, okay, I'm going to wrap up everything that they just said, because overall, the culture in HBCUs is family.
Yeah.
They give you that whole family feeling. They give you that whole family love. When I walked up into that school, when I walked into Jackson State, I can honestly say to you that the feeling of not being by myself was there right off the bat. It wasn't like I walked somewhere and I had to meet someone in order to feel comfortable or in order to feel like I belong. It didn't happen that way. Back then, I thought it was because of my brother, who my brother was and what he did in Mississippi, who he worked for. But now when I think about it, he had nothing to do with it. It was all about just the people and them and coming together as one and just us being a family. And I can honestly say to you that even today, there are people from back in 90 to 93 that I can't live without. They're everything to me. So it's a family thing. That's what HBCUs are. It's a straight family. Yes, we did the plaza. Yes, we did the student union. Of course, one of the best things about Jackson State is the Sonic Boom of the South, and that is their band. There's not one school on this representing on here or representing outside of it that can touch them, okay? And they're laughing because they know where I'm coming from. And they know
she was going to say. Mama,
I love you, Donya. I love you.
Here goes the band talk.
Yes. I mean, there's nothing like the boom. There's nothing like the boom.
See, I guess the smallest experience that I had that touched on that was at University of Connecticut joining the Black Student Union. Yeah. And again, there were students at University of Connecticut who didn't understand why we needed to have a Black student union. But that was really important to us, much in the same way as what you guys have just been talking about. Now, YaYa mentioned something about the lawns and the kind of like public quad. Well, we're kind of going through that with Howard University at the moment. As you know, DC is gentrifying, and a lot of the people who have moved into that area have been using the Howard quad as a dog toilet. So needless to say, students and staff feel a kind of way. They're really angry about that. Something that I don't think a lot of people understand about African Americans in general, we're germaphobes. We are germaphobes. And as much as we love our fur babies and pets and stuff, yeah, we're not down for laying down where they do their business. But for an urban historically Black college, that is a real issue. And the people who've moved in, who've gentrified it, don't really understand why so many people are so angry about that.
Yeah,
they understand.
I live 8 minutes from Howard, and so that whole situation, it became a bigger situation in time because there was some other things going on in the neighborhood that were very much about gentrification, dealing with like go-go music and noise ordinance.
Yeah.
Yes.
But, yeah, they understand. They understand. I'm not gonna even sit here and give them the benefit of the doubt of not understanding. It's a whole cultural change in DC as a whole. So because that whole change is happening, they're trying to make it fit to them. Period. That's my thought process on that. I could be wrong, but y'all know me. I'm gonna express me, and I just feel like that's what it is. It's a way of trying to make people do what they want them to do, and that's not gonna go down like that. It just shouldn't go down like that.
So Brian, I was gonna say two things to echo that is that lawns at a HBCU are every campus. You don't walk on the grass. That's just every campus I know of. Now some of them might be. Then there's other places you can't walk on. Like I know Virginia State, you can't walk on the Trojan heads. They have painted their mascots and Trojans. They have painted Trojan heads around campus. You have to walk around it. But it's an actual, in most HBCUs, everything is kind of hollow ground when it comes to grass. So when you talk about what happened at Howard, or I don't know how much of it's still happening, that was even more of a case because it wasn't just them walking on campus. It was them walking on the grass that even the students don't do. They might be able to lay on it based on certain times where it's like a formal event where it's like she was saying, like I was saying about Pretty Wednesdays. Like we used to have Market Friday, and there might be certain occasions where it's like, okay, you can be on the grass now, but that was even more of a case because students don't just walk on the grass in general. Grass is just. If I go to any HBCU, Savannah State, I've never physically been to Savannah State, but I would know immediately not to walk on the grass.
Not to walk on the grass, yeah.
And I'm wondering, it makes me wonder how much of that stems from, well, number one is aesthetics purposes, but also because it's knowing going to what we didn't have, what we wanted, and now we want to make it look nice because many of these people who are in the South, especially that come from areas where there's nothing but plantations and you have Black people living on these places, they didn't have grass around their cabins. They had swept grass. So these hard, compact grounds, and so they didn't have real grass to take care of. And so now we have something, we want to make it look nice. We want our lawns to look nice and to look pretty. Not like somebody stepped on. When you go by somebody's house, you don't park in their grass. The first thing my dad tell me, don't pull on my grass. That is his grass, and they want to make it look nice. But also, there are a lot of schools that are built upon lands where there are people that are buried there. And so that's also about just being respectful of individuals. We're in Louisiana, you're walking on somebody at every single moment there is. And that's just the way it works. And so you never know where you're walking, but there are so many spaces that are sacred grounds. Just don't touch it. Just like no one wants to go and mess. Well, we don't go mess with Native American mounds. Other people do, but we don't because we know the sacredness of it. So the same respect and the same regard should be given. We're not a study case. We're not a science case to go digging in the dirt and trying to figure out what's going on with us or whatever. But as Donya mentioned, people know exactly what they're doing. That's and right. It is a level of disrespect because they know they can. Okay, you got it. I don't care if you have it, but I'm going to disrespect it anyway. It's like someone coming over there and urinating on your lawn.
It's a power move. It's a power move.
It's a pissing contest.
That's exactly what it is. It's a power move. It's a move that letting you know, hey, yeah, this might be your space, but for real, it belongs to me.
Yeah.
I'm the one that I'm the reason you're going to be there because of me. And that's that. It's an overall power move.
Right.
It really is.
Now, one thing that I've always found this confusing is the funding model. Because do I have it wrong? At certain periods in history, the federal government, the funding had to be renewed every year instead of just saying we're going to give you this block funding that's going to cover you for this period of time. Do I have that right?
It's not the total budget, but yeah, because of I can't think what it's called, but HBCUs get federal funding. That's renewed, I believe, every year.
It's a form of protection. So that's like with the 1965 acts and laws that, so technically any school before, say 1965, 1964 can be considered an HBCU. So they have that federal protection and can, eligible for for funds. But a lot of our monies are still, they still have to come from enrollment, things like that. And so when enrollment is down, or more students are not going to college, then of course those funds, those state funds, those federal funds, they dry up. It can only do so much.
Right.
So I wanted to ask you guys how did you feel about, because it bothers me. There's one school in West Virginia called Bluefield State College or Bluefield State University. It is a HBCU, but it is the whitest HBCU ever.
Yeah, it's like 80% white.
It's 80% white. So how do you because when Brian bringing up the funding, they're receiving that funding, but they're considered a black school, but they're not. How do you guys feel about that?
So my question to that would be, who let them in? But I asked it for a reason, because if they're in and they kept getting in, and I'm not trying to be discriminatory or anything of that sort, but if they're being let in and continuously let in, but it's still getting funded, at some point no one said, hey, we need to maybe look at this. But you can't really say that, because then someone's going to be screaming reverse racism. So I may not agree, or someone else may not agree, but how did they actually get in? And what is the school doing at this point to try to recruit more Black students, more African-American students? So it could go to exactly what they're claiming to be, an HBCU, because by all means, anybody who can get over, gonna get over. And so
it was an HBCU. It was one at one point. But the main way that they stopped African Americans from going to the school was taking away room and board. So they couldn't come into the school at all. You couldn't come to West Virginia. You had to live in West Virginia in order to even attend the school, because there was no room and board.
Well, actually, Shelley Murphy just beat me to the punch, because I was going to ask whether there was a demographic change. Whether there was a population of African Americans who could go, and then, I don't know, as employment changed or economic factors changed, did a lot of the African Americans in the catchment area start moving out and start moving to either other parts of the state, or were they going to other states?
I think Donya alluded to it. It's two things. I think it's definitely. I don't know if I can hit a siren, but I think it's two things. I think that room and board is huge.
Yes.
Any school, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter where your school is. There's only been so many cities where that catchment area is a predominantly Black area, where a lot of these colleges are, right? Like that can fill the whole school without having to have students from out of state or outside of that region. West Virginia, that was intentional. That was definitely intentional. I believe that more African Americans probably moved from that area, but also you're not going to draw any people there if there's
no place to stay.
Right. If there's lack of opportunity. Right.
Yeah, it becomes a commuter college, and it's already in a place that didn't have a high Black population at that time.
Right.
That's not a surprise. Now on the flip side, Another school like that that's in somewhat of a area with more African Americans is Tennessee State. Is probably at this point, if it's not majority white, it's like second or third as far as having the most white students of HBCU, and that's in Nashville.
Okay. And to probably answer a question that hasn't been asked by the audience yet, given the time frame that we're talking about, even to the relatively recent time, if you wanted to go to that university and you didn't live in state, or you lived on the complete other side of West Virginia, it was not easy to be able to rent a property because you were Black.
Right.
So
there are always going to be some kind of discriminatory practices that are there. Now, I completely, wholeheartedly agree and understand that it should not be happening. But the logistics of it, the facts of it is still considered an HBCU. You can't take the namesake from it. Just even if the population has changed, which is devastating. But I think that should push more to try to rearrange that system. Because higher education, there's no loyalty in any of it, and it's a business just as well. It doesn't matter who it is. So if it's a business at the end of the day, we should need to be coming up with more ways to help assist this. Go out and if you vote, go vote to try to help change some of these laws and change some of these practices. Get with the board, speak to them, because it needs to happen. That it needs to reflect exactly what you're claiming to be or what you're saying. But that also kind of brings into another argument that we have some of these HBCUs that are now trying to market themselves globally and outside of an HBCU presence and HBCU appearance. So how do you deal with that just as well? I've had that instance my own self. Well, okay, well, what is the HBCU culture? How do we represent HBCU life? And there's some of the responses are not what I expect or not what I want. Well, we're trying to market ourselves internationally and so on and so forth. But then why are you still claiming HBCU if that's what you're not trying to be? If you want to be for everybody, then go be for everybody. If you want to be for the streets and for the world, then fine. But there has to be a reckoning of some sort. So how do we actually deal with that?
Also, I'll also say this too, that connectivity that you're referring to is also a problem. I know Diane and I were talking earlier about just K through 12 education. And one thing so we talked about Howard, like, the first public school for African Americans in the United States, public high school, is Dunbar High School in DC.
Dunbar.
And the connectivity between Dunbar and Howard was always close, extremely close in those early years, because Dunbar was an exceptional institution that fed in. When you look at the feeder patterns of schools, of the school system in the United States, which is consistently failing Black students. And then on one aspect, you want your colleges to be of a certain caliber. Our feeder pattern is broken. So in some aspects, these schools do have to seek outside people to maintain the business of the school. Right. But that's also an issue of K through 12 education.
K through 12, right. And you're absolutely correct. We look at Louisiana and Mississippi. The education systems here are horrible, especially our public school, K through 12. And we're not meeting students where they are. So me also working in higher ed, you only get what a parent sends you. You only get what a K through 12 sends you. And a lot of these students are unfortunately not equipped to compete in an HBC or any kind of collegiate setting in higher education, not being able to pass the math proficiency or the English proficiency, things like that, not really understanding the ACT or the SAT, or having undiagnosed learning disabilities. Higher education is not going to stop just because someone doesn't understand. It's going to keep going. And it is a business, so it has to keep operating. And that means outsourcing and getting others to come in to make sure it keeps in operation. And that's what they're going to do.
Well, we may have to get you guys back, because we definitely were in the final seconds, haven't even touched on the future of HBCUs.
And shout out to Dr. Murphy, because she is always on it. I love her. Like, she is on it.
So we may have to get you guys back to talk about the future of these institutions and what that might actually looked like. I can't believe this hour has once again flown by.
It has.
Um,
It has.
but
It's definitely been a joy to talk to you guys, and I would like to
Mhm.
continue the conversation, even if it may be in the next season. So if you guys are open for that, we would love it.
Absolutely.
Definitely.
Okay.
Yes. Always. It's a pleasure.
And we are at the top of the hour, which means only one thing. Thank you so much for tuning in. Thank you guys, both YaYa and Kyle, for joining us and educating me more than anyone else about various aspects of these special institutions. And until then, see everyone else next Sunday, 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, right here.
Yes.
Thank you.
Bye,
Thank you.
guys. We love
Bye.
you. You guys can stay on for a moment if you want, but
Yes.
thank you guys for joining us. See ya.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.